Anyway, that brings us to tonight's entertainment item. John Dennis is going to talk to us about the Stannary Hills Tramway, which is in far north Queensland, part of the world I've been past but never actually been to. But I say over to John Dennis. Would you please wave a hand to give him a welcome? It's a bit hard to clap. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, everybody. Now, one of these is...
sorry, John, just before you go, I'll
Yep.
mute everybody and then I'll ask you to unmute. I meant to do that
Sure.
before.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
Okay. You're muted, John. Yep.
All right. Sorry about that. The mute button sort of was in a different spot once I shared my screen. Anyway, this presentation has a genesis going back to 2006, I think, when I gave it at a narrow gauge convention, Australian narrow gauge convention. At the time, it was mooted to be my next model railway, so it was modelling oriented. I've chucked out all of the model stuff because it's not really appropriate here, but there's still an awful lot to get through. So let's hit the road. Stannary Hills, for the people who don't actually know where it is, it's right up there near Cairns, far north Queensland. You can see the red little house up there. 2,280 kilometres, or heading on for 1,500 miles due north of where I live. And according to Google, it would take me 31 hours to drive there. That would be probably 5 days driving, I think, for me these days. It's a bloody long way away. And to paraphrase Ian Idris, who wrote a number of novels around Australia, but in particular two in Cairns, we're going tin scratching back of Cairns. You can see here the this area. Hang on, I'll click on the laser pointer properly. This area is where we're talking about. Boonmoo, Stannary Hills, Irvine and Rocky Bluff. This is an old map of the tramways that was in the 1962 Australian Railway Historical Society Bulletin. Probably not, the most accurate map for, these days. Any number of people in our organisation could do an awful lot better, but I quite like it, and it serves the purpose very well. One thing of interest is that this town down here, Watsonville, which is not listed as part of the tramways, was the original destination of the tramway. The tramway went to service a mine down here, which was part of the Stannary Hills group, with Rocky Bluff as the battery. Before we proceed, we will have a little quick history, a potted history. This presentation, although it was described as a history, is more an illustrated history, with the emphasis more on the illustrations and less on the history. In other words, it's a set of photos. But we'll start off with a bit of history. In the 1870s, minerals were discovered up in this area, and in 1880, John Moffat erected mills and smelters at Irvine. In those days, of course, there was no transport, no rail transport anyway. So, it's all done by horse and cart or pack horse or whatever. Very, very hard to get the stuff out. There were other mines were discovered along Eureka Creek, which is where Stannary Hills is. But those mines were mined. They were probably not really much was happening. But soon after, in about 1901, the Chillago Railway opened. Now that was a private line that ran from Mareeba to Chillago, to service the mines and a very large smelter that was built there. In 1901, it opened. Before then, of course, people knew it was being built, and the Stannary Hills Mining Company began to plan and to build their line to connect with this railway at Boonmoo. Mind you, John Moffat at Irvanbank had been contemplating building his own line from Irvanbank to another point on the Chillagoe Railway to export his tin. That never went anywhere, and unfortunately, the survey that was made disappeared in a fire, which is really disappointing, because it would have been interesting to see what it did. So the Chillagoe Railway opened in 1901. Here is what the Stannary Hills Company proposed. Boonmoo up here on the Chillagoe line, down here to the Caledonia mine at Watsonville, through Stannary Hills, this area in the middle, with a branch to Rocky Bluffs, which is where the battery was located. Now, as the line was built through this mining area, it became very clear that for the company to begin to start making money, they had to get their product to the battery, to the mill, and back out again. So this line was built first to Rocky Bluff, and the line to Watsonville and the Caledonia just quietly disappeared. I don't think anybody's really found any documented statement by the company it wasn't going to be built. It's just not mentioned again. So 1900 they began construction, which was before the Chillagoe Railway opened. 1902 they opened the Stannary Hills, onwards to Rocky Bluff in November, and Irvanbank began to build their line in 1906, and in 1907 that line opened. So 1907 we had all the tramways were open, the battery was open, there was stuff going all over the place really. It was a very busy time. The First World War had an impact, naturally. There's a downturn in mining, and I'm never absolutely sure whether copper took a downturn, because you wouldn't imagine it would, but all the blokes who used to work went to fight in the war, so they had a lot of trouble getting people. The government took over Irvanbank, and because it was very important, they could see, and called it the State Treatment Works. But in 1922, Stannary Hills, suffering the same problems, closed, and in order to get Irvanbank stuff out, the government took over that organisation as well. 26, they dismantled the line to Rocky Bluffs. The line was closed in 36, and 5 years later, they finally got around to dismantling it and selling the rails to the sugar industry, and a couple of locos as well. Okay, we will start with the Stannary Hills Railway, and we'll work our way down through from Boonmoo in order down to Rocky Bluffs, and look at a few of the scenes to be had. Boonmoo is the junction. This is the Queensland or Chillagoe line to start with, later the Queensland Railway line, with a siding into here, and the Stannary Hills Tramway came in here with a bit of dual gauge, they think. Cross-platform transfer, sort of, for good stuff. Boonmoo's nestled under the Pinnacle, and Mount Pinnacle, some people call it. This is Jackson's Hotel, which served as the restaurant, as the refreshment room. The down and the up trains to Chillagoe crossed here and met the Stannary Hills train. So sort of in the middle of every day, it was quite a busy spot. This is a Chillagoe loco here, and this is a Stannary Hills loco there. This photo, which is obviously early in the piece by the stack of rails and things on the platform, shows Pompey, which was Stannary Hills' first loco, a small baby Krause. You will note here there's this person sitting in this little car behind it, carriage behind it. This was, I believe, a photographer's special. The Stannary Hills Company did what all good companies did in those days and paid a professional photographer to come and document the railway after it was open, the tramway, at least as far as Stannary Hills after it was open. The result was we got this wonderful set of photos of a brand new tramway with this little loco working a train, which was never really designed. It was only bought for construction purposes. These were the locos that Stannary Hills operated primarily. The Falcon built, they were ordered, I think, from Falcon. They were delivered from Brush, who took over Falcon. I think that's right anyway, or they might have been still Brush when it was ordered. This photo also taken at Bournemouth. Delightful locos, these, I think, 260s. And this is Germany, which was a, we'll talk about the locos later, but it's a Borsig 442 sitting below the pinnacle again at Bournemouth. And by the look of all the weeds and things, it's late in the life of the tramway, as you'd expect. It's nothing much happens along this bit here. It follows the creek, but that's about all. Until you get to Eureka Gorge. Eureka Gorge is quite a spectacular spot. Certainly the highlight of the railway. You can see it went up a side creek, back again, and then followed Eureka Creek all the way to Stannary Hills. Quite spectacular. This up on top is the survey, Dixon's call. You can notice it says up here, Dixon's Tramway, Dixon's survey. The line comes along here, does its U-turn, right, gaining altitude. It's got to come from relatively low here up quite a lot. It rises up quite a lot before it gets to Stannary Hills. And but there are a couple of interesting things here, differences here, things to ponder. This area up here in particular, which is here on this Google Earth map, if we look at what the railway did, and this is Hairy Legs, that John Paff, I think, is it? A bloke has added overlays to Google Earth with all of the railways in Australia that he knows of. And you'll notice that the survey shows the line just looping around this hill here. He's drawn the line like this, and it's like a big Rodney from the Wizard of Oz nose, if you know who Rodney is in the Wizard of Oz, which is obviously quite different to what was surveyed. Here we are back again. This drawing, this is a map. This is a company diagram. It's actually, I've made this a little wider. Here's Stannary Hills down the bottom. You can see the triangle. This is Ivanhoe, where the mine is. But this area here is where the creek does its Wizard of Oz nose. And you see the railway line curves around there, which is much closer to what the survey says than the way the drawing has been done. I reckon, well, I think this is what actually happened. But again, this drawing was dated. Here, by the way, here's a photo showing that's the line to Stannary Hills. That's the line out to Bournemouth, which is sort of doing this. And this line across this way is the line in here to Kitchener Mine. You can see it just runs straight into the mine. This diagram was, so it says referred to in my report, 19th of December, 1906. So I suspect this is probably right. And I suspect that Hairy Legs has used the maps in Rocky Bluff to Denmark, the maps that we have published, which show that this route, as does Cecil Singleton here in the ARHS Bulletin article. Anyway, nevertheless, that's just a bit of a conundrum. Eureka Gorge is quite a spectacular spot, quite high up above the creek. on a ledge. Apparently, sections of it were built by suspending people from the cliff above, which seems like the sort of thing that they did to build the Trans-America, or the first transcontinental railway in America. And that seems a bit over the top for a little 2-foot gauge mining tramway, but that's what people reckon happened. The railway line was built with 2-chain and in a few places 1.5-chain curves, which resulted in the super elevation, meaning that some of these cliffs were mighty close to the cars as they went around these tight bends. Various stories, various reports in newspaper articles or letters to the editor described this journey as being frightening, with the cliffs only inches away on one side and the abyss apparently only inches away on the other side, and a guard on the train shouting out, "Keep your bleeping elbows in," all the way along this journey. Here's another shot in the gorge on one of these little bridges. This is one of Stannary Hill's Falcon locomotives. This is the photographer's special. Everything's quite new, you can see that. This is where the Horseshoe Bend is, track here and track here. According to a bloke who worked in Irvine, a bloke by the name of Mick O'Callaghan, the 11.25 mile peg is almost directly opposite the 11.5 mile peg in a straight line about 100 yards away, but the 1/2 mile peg is 40 feet higher. So the line is climbing up here to get to the gorge itself. You can't tell whether this is the photographer's special, but the fact that it's Pompey, the little locomotive, suggests it is. This sort of photo, this is a spectacular photo, well worthy of being a postcard. And in fact, it became a postcard, was colorized in the days when it was a bit harder to do than it is now. Spectacular spot. The next item of interest is Ivanhoe Mine. Rocky Bluff to Denmark has this diagram in it. It's interesting that Rocky Bluff to Denmark says that's due north. This map that I've got in here says that's due north, and yet it puts Ivanhoe down at this angle. So I don't quite understand. I don't think Ivanhoe had been settled by this stage. The interesting thing was that the survey went to here, and it went around here, and then stopped here, the survey, because this was a mining lease, and the survey didn't extend over the mining leases. I guess it was up to the builders to do the rest of the bit themselves. Jerry's map in Rocky Bluff to Denmark doesn't show the location of the ore bins. There was one here across the line and another one here. So there were 2 mines. This one dumped into that little bin. This one dumped into that bigger bin. And here's a photo showing the second mine, which was this one here, the later mine. In the course of construction, you can see the loading bins, which is those red bins there. The loading bins are there, siding here with ore hoppers, skips, trucks, call them what you like, there. This was one of the reasons why my layout, I was building Ivanhoe, but it was very complicated. And one of the reasons it stopped was because you can see Jerry's diagram here shows a trailing point from Stannary Hills. Stannary Hills down here, Boomloo out there, a trailing point, which I happily went ahead and built, and was sort of at the stages of beginning to flesh out some scenery, and came across this photo and thought, wow, the point isn't there. The point is actually in here. So it actually faces trains from Stannary Hills, which is a much easier way to work. the train would come in here, the loco would run around, push its empties in here, maybe come back, put its fulls in here and push them into the siding from this direction. Much more sensible than going out here and back. Very, very obvious, but so obvious I didn't really look into it at the time. But you can see the bins, the hoppers and the tailing chute over the tramway where they just dumped all their rubbish straight into the creek. This is a lovely photo taken later. I'm not absolutely certain whether the second mine is in operation yet. It looks pretty new, but you can see the two mines. The loading bin is here for the older mine. Tracks sort of hidden in this photo, but it is a lovely photo. This is powerhouse for the the powerhouse, the boiler house for the mine. And here is an ore train heading towards Stannary Hills, having loaded. Well, I don't know that. It's a loaded ore train. I don't know whether it's come from Kitchener. I don't know whether it's come from the earlier ore loading point, or whether it loaded here. You can see through the smoke the bins. This is the powerhouse, the power station. Only two truckloads of firewood there. One thing you will note through this presentation is that there are probably more photos of firewood being hauled than there are of ore being hauled, which is something I wrote for many years, a regular column in Narrow Gauge Down Under, documenting these obscure tramways around Australia. And one of the things I said quite often, that there was more firewood hauled, or at least more wagons of firewood hauled, than there were of ore on most of these mining railways. This is something that I have absolutely no idea what it is. I've seen it in this photo, obviously, but I have not ever seen any indication as to what it is. It looks like it almost goes up in a vertical climb. No idea. Notice that the railways keep sort of going. It's quite bizarre. I haven't found any mention of it anywhere. The only evidence I have is this photo. This is the original mine, the original loading bins in the chute and the mine up the hill. That's on the opposite, that's other side of the tramway to the creek, if you know what I mean by that. And the second mine was between the tramway and the creek, which is here. We're very fortunate that a bloke by the name of Bancroft, Dr. Bancroft, the Stannary Hills town doctor, was a keen photographer. Not only was he a keen photographer, but he elected to put his residence at Stannary Hills Station rather than in the town. Lots of people wondered why his house, to go and see the doctor, you had to go to the railway station, which wasn't an easy thing to do, as we'll find out. I reckon he was just a closet railway enthusiast, and this was an easy access to the tramway. Here's two of his kids down here, some trucks waiting to be loaded in the original bin, and this is the second mine up here with the loading point over there. Further around, you get a really nice view of these overhead ore bins with his two kids, probably taken the same day, but not necessarily. This was about a mile away. Now in country terms, a mile is nothing. People, I remember in my day, we used to walk 5 miles to school barefooted, that type of story. So a mile down the track was nothing. So we can see here, this is where the ore was taken along to here and then emptied into the bin. And that's the chimney for the powerhouse that we saw earlier, boiler house. This is how the ore came up. It was wheeled out to here. I cannot see any reason why the ore trucks didn't just keep going and land in the bins themselves, in the ore bins, the hoppers. But hopefully this was before things had opened and there was a balk or something put across there to stop that happening. But it does show the arrangement with a curve here, and there's another curve to get back into the head frame. There's a few random photos here, mainly because I don't know precisely where they were. A couple of women wandering along the line. This was what they did on a Sunday, picnics, probably near Stannary Hills. Here's a firewood train, firewood again. Don't know where this is. That's a Falcon locomotive. Another Falcon locomotive at an unknown location. I suspect this one is near Boon Moo. I like the way these people, they stop the train and stand up for the photographer. I reckon that's really cool. And so we get to Stannary Hills, which is the headquarters of the railway. Strategically placed with cliffs all around it, well, with cliffs at this side anyway, for wonderful views down over the station. We have workshops, engine shed workshops here. That, I think, is the maybe passenger station. I'm not sure. These buildings here are the mine managers' residence and the company offices. That's the general goods shed down there. The creek runs along here, and to get to town, you cross over the tramway here, walk down beside the goods shed, go down to the creek, cross on a bridge which was frequently washed out when it flooded, and then up the other side to get into town. They're a bit ahead of the time, obviously, Stannary Hills, because building railway stations nowhere near the people that are going to use them seems to be something they do these days. Here's a town map, a parish map. The station was in this area. All the houses were down here. This doesn't show the footpath, unfortunately, but it came down here and across and then up to the town. This photograph, very nice photo. This was published in Rocky Bluff to Denmark. Shows 3 locomotives. We've got the Falcon here, a Falcon, there were 2 of them, on the Stannary Hills train from Boon Moo, one would expect. This is Betty, a large Kraus that the Irvine Bank Tramway's first loco is here, presumably with the connecting train to Irvine Bank. And in the background here is the second Falcon. And although it's hard to see, there are ore trucks behind it. So it is waiting for these passenger trains to get out of the way so it can resume the real business of this tramway, which is transporting ore. Not to be outdone, this photo, unfortunately, it's not sharp. I paid money to the Cairns Historical Society to get a better version of this, but it wasn't any better. But it has got 4 locos. That's one of the Falcons here with a little tender. That's another Falcon here also with a tender, I think. That's Pompey, the first loco Stannary Hills had. It's actually got a little 4-wheel passenger car behind it. And here is Betty, the Irvine Bank locomotive, patiently waiting for something. Who knows? Those hills above Stannary Hills station provide really nice vantage points. These are the workshops with advertising, Stannary Hills Mines and Tramway Company Limited, it says on the top. More stuff down here. This little building here, I think, I'm not certain what that is. I think it might have been the original passenger station platform. But it's a beauty. It was certainly going to be in my model. I like these buildings that where the front of them's on the ground and the back half is on stilts. And this photo here, taken from further around and angled slightly, shows some shows a train arriving from Boon Moo first, but also shows some hoppers at Eclipse Mine, which is up the hill up here above them. Here's the real good shed. As I said, I don't know what the other one was. Might have been the station. The good shed, bags of all sorts of things here. I have one photo that suggests that bags are charcoal. Other people have said they're chaff. The processed tin that had been through the battery, and Irvine didn't necessarily smelt all of their stuff, was bagged. So it's possible that some of these could be bagged tin as well. And these guys, I suspect, are heading for Irvine down the road, over the bridge, up the other side, down the Stannary Hills Road to Irvine. The other side of Stannary Hills is Black Bridge. This is the biggest bridge on the two tramways systems. Has a curve here, you can see, which limited trains to 3 miles an hour crossing the bridge. Lots of locals called this bridge a double-deck bridge, presumably because of these things at the lower level. I'm not a bridge engineer. Someone might know. Note this train too is actually running 10 to first. I don't know, you can't really see it all that clearly, but it is running 10 to first, which is very unusual. With the Stannary Hills had triangles at all of their turn back places, but not at Ivanhoe. So I guess a train going to Ivanhoe would be 10 to first, but that's the other direction. We're now heading to Rocky Bluffs. The Irvine Tramway, when it opened, gained trackage rights into Stannary Hills. They gave up firewood at the far end of their line, to the end nearest the Stannary Hills line. So the Stannary Hills guys were allowed to go out and collect the firewood from a little bit of the Irvine Tramway. So this is Irvine Tramway's third locomotive, an Avon side called Old John, on the Black Bridge, heading for Irvine. And now we get to the junction, nice name, the junction, which is the junction of the Rocky Bluffs line, the Stannary Hills Rocky Bluffs line, and the Irvine Tramway line. I guess one of the reasons why this Irvine Tramway were very keen to come in here was to avoid having to cross the same creek that the Stannary Hills Tramway had already crossed with the Black Bridge. So this is a Falcon heading an empty ore train. All these vehicles are empty, with a four-wheel passenger car. It features quite a lot. I don't know how long it existed. My notes suggest that it was able to be scrapped after they got bogie cars, but it seems to have coexisted with them for quite some time. Safe working on this line was telephone. There is somewhere here, I have never been into the junction, but somewhere here there is apparently still a single telephone pole. Further on the way to Rocky Bluff, we pass 2 or 3 sidings that are just, well, I don't know, they're nothing. There's no photos anywhere there, so they don't feature here. And we get to the Arbuin siding. Now, the mine was here somewhere, connected with a horse tramway to an upper terminal to a ropeway or cableway, which then flew down like a flying fox over the creek to this siding. you can see there is a hopper or a wagon, sorry, I don't know how to describe it, a bucket maybe, that has come down from the mine. There's a Falcon with empty ore cars and with the four-wheel passenger car. In later years, after the war, so in that short period of time, 1919 to 22 or so, most of the ore that was being processed at the battery came from here, and they were running shuttle trains just between here and Rocky Bluffs. That might be this period, which also suggests that the little four-wheel passenger car was not scrapped when the bogie cars arrived. Of course, had the line to Watsonville gone ahead, that would have gone down here and would have been very, very close to the mine. However, that would have required crossing Basin Gully here, which would have meant a 300-foot long, or 100 metres in for the youngsters, long bridge, 100 feet or 30 metres above the creek. Would have been a significant bridge. Cost a lot of money, you'd expect. Might be one of the reasons why things just quietly disappeared. Here's the view from the loading of the downhill bin, with a bucket here, and the uphill side over there. Leon Idris, in his book Back of Cans, mentions in describing this, he says there was an eerie shriek. He describes the operation as loaded bins coming down, a loaded bin coming down, just one off, hauling an empty one up. It's quite possible, of course. But he then goes on to say the truck drops down onto an empty underframe and then goes onto the battery. Well, the problem is that these bins are at right angles to the railway, and if they just drop down onto an empty underframe, why would you need to have a loading bin here to dump the ore into? But anyway, there is somewhere in the back of my mind, I have a vague recollection of reading something about the Arduin bins being relocated, and it's possible that that might have been what they did to start with. But I'm very, very strongly of the opinion that the Stannary Hills ore hoppers or bodies were bolted to their underframe and weren't going to be lifted. Here's another view at Arduin with another Falcon. These ones got loaded hoppers this time. And here's the bin. They're relatively new photos to me, these ones. We were only discovered a couple of years ago, thanks to Phil. And if you look here, the bin is there, or the bucket is there, which is substantially smaller, I think, than these guys. And onward to Rocky Bluff. So here's the junction, and here's various sidings along the way. Here's where this place was to be called Battery Junction, where the line to Watsonville headed off. Here's Arduin and on to Rocky Bluff, which looked like this, according to Jerry Verhoeven, and he walked the line, well, long time after it had closed, but still. In this part of the world, there were no people destroying things. Things stayed in pretty good nick in terms of the formation and the like. So he was able to discern that there was a triangle here, there was a loop here, gravitation tramway with a pit at each end, down here to the battery, which was down there along on the Walsh River, and there was a dam to provide water. This was a bit weird, really, because ore was mined in Stannary Hills and then had to travel 13 miles or whatever it was, I've forgotten, 9.5, maybe 13 kilometres to the battery, and then be processed and then be taken all the way back past Stannary Hills to out to Boonmoo. Various people have said, why didn't they just ship the water, put a pipeline in? But there were good reasons for doing it here. This is one of them. Here's the gravitation tramway coming down the incline, the twin track incline. And here's the battery. You can see there, that's where the wagons were tumbled. In fact, it was described in the documentation or in the articles I've read as a tumbler. And then the ore would just work its way down here by gravity, which is what, if you see American mills, American batteries, they're all built down a hill like this for very good reason. One thing that I have not ever been able to find is after it gets down here, you get black tin, it's called, which is the processed tin. It's ready now to be smelted. Nowhere, it's bagged, but nobody has written anywhere about how they got the bag back up here to and out to the rest of the world. Anyway, there's plenty of things still to read. This is the view looking down with firewood being delivered just for fun. You can see it's a balanced incline. This loaded vehicle wagon is attached to the cable, goes around pulleys and then down to drag up the empty one. Down here is where the bottom end. The railway trucks were loaded transversely on the incline trucks. So there were rails at right angle, and you can just see them down here, rails at right angle. The two tracks ran down, one here and one down here. The wagon was pushed off or pushed onto the incline car, and a little turntable then here, swung it around, and there was another turntable there to get it to the battery. Quite labour intensive. And when you consider that when the battery was processing ore, one wagon to go down, one wagon to come up, there was nowhere here to have a stock of this stuff. So this wagon would have to be pushed over, emptied in, tipped into the ore bin. Then the empty wagon would have to come back, and all that had to happen before the next wagon could go down. Don't know how long that process took. Another view looking down, and you get a better view down here of this actually is an ore wagon down here this time, of that wagon's about to be pushed across here onto here where the turntable is. It runs down here, another turntable over here to the top of the battery where the hopper is located. Small little town down here. Never ever saw a motor vehicle when it was a town. Certainly as late as 1970, it was reported that not even a four-wheel drive had made it down here. But I believe there is a way now to get there on a four-wheel drive. The houses here, houses in a row, they somewhat ironically called, well, it's not ironical, it's actual. They called the street they lived on, even though it wasn't really a street, Rough as Hell Street, because that's exactly what it was like. People worked there, people lived there, people worked there, people had kids there, and initially the kids went to school at Stannary Hills. They travelled not on a special train at all, but they travelled in empty ore trucks, and loaded ore trucks back, I guess, quite bizarre. A school was built in 1904. This town was described in a letter to the editor of a Charters Towers newspaper as the last place made on God's earth. And my advice to any holiday makers is don't spend your holidays at Rocky Bluffs. The bloke was not at all impressed. He wasn't impressed with the train ride either through Eureka Gorge. Timber heading off from the top end. This actually, inspection of the two photos showing the timber wagon showed it to be the same the same wagon. The angle of various bits of wood is the same. This is a pretty crappy photo, but that's the best I've got. You can see the pulleys up here. Quite what they did under there, I'm not sure, but there must have been, it was balanced, so there must have been come down to another pulley and then up the other side. And down the bottom, it was a picnic place, would you believe? So this is a happy family having a picnic at Rocky Bluffs and taking a photo of themselves on an ore car down at the turntable at the bottom end of the incline. And we'll wrap up Rocky Bluffs, which means we'll wrap up Stannary Hills, locations anyway, with this nice hand-tinted view of the battery from across the dam. It's been hand-tinted, but also cleansed, I think you'd say, in terms of a very, very clean-looking building. And we'll turn our attention to the Urban Bank tramway now. Now, this line's got a lot less information than Stannary Hills had. One reason being, as I mentioned, a fire that destroyed the original survey, but it also destroyed the survey for this line. So here's Stannary Hills. Here's Kitchener Mine I've mentioned, Stannary Hills. The line went out here towards Rocky Bluff and down here, and I've got to find it now. Comes out about here, invisible into this survey map, shows it as a closed line. Followed its way down here to Yorkie's Cutting. This was the boundary point of the firewood collection. This was Stannary Hills Connect firewood north of there. Wound its way through here to Hales Siding, which is up here in this diagram. Continued down to Wynart Siding. Down to Victoria Siding. This was a loading point at one time for slag from Mont Albion, which was a mine around this area that was being worked over again. Into Gaines Flat. Gaines Flat was known temporarily as All But, because it was the first temporary terminus. So when the line reached here, trains began to operate to here with horse-drawn carriage or walking or whatever, the 2 miles into Urban Bank. Later, another temporary terminus was opened right down here where the dam is at close-up, before the line made its way all the way around into Urban Bank. Yorkie's Cutting, long-ish, deep-ish, narrow-ish. 8 feet wide. Now the locos are probably more than 6 feet across, so you wouldn't want to be walking through here with a train coming towards you. This was the scenic highlight, I think, of the Urban Bank tramway, and as I mentioned, was the dividing point for firewood trains. Here's a view from in a wagon, by the look of it, an open wagon, working its way through Yorkie's Cutting. Further down, Cummings Creek, which is near Hales Siding. This was a postcard, quite a well-known postcard. I've got various versions of it. Unfortunately, not one of them shows a nice clear view of all of the front of the locomotive. But one thing that is clear here, which we will see later, is the fact that the smoke box is its original size. Got a lovely 4-wheel tender. John Browning and I spent quite a while discussing tenders of these locomotives, the various locomotives that operated on these railways, and came up with a massively high number of variations of tenders. And further on, we get closer to Urban Bank. This is the Urban Bank Dam. Firewood train is approaching Urban Bank. We see lots of firewood. Now, according to the Cairns Historical Society, this photo and the next photo are listed as openings. This is listed as the opening of the railway line at All But with the locomotive Germany. That's the Borsig here, and a whole bunch of people, had to celebrate the opening of the line. The biggest problem is that the line opened here in 1906, in December 1906, and Germany was not in service until March 1908, at least March, might have been later. So that could not have been an opening train. That was a picnic train or a excursion train or a football train, bringing football supporters down to play football against Irvenbank, but not an opening train. This next photo, Cairns Historic Society, I'm sorry about the quality of this. This was another one that I paid lots of money for to get a better quality image, and it wasn't. This photograph also purports to be the opening of the Irvenbank Tramway after it's opened all the way to Irvenbank. Well, the line was extended to Irvenbank in April 1907, and they started to run the first thing that worked by train there after they opened the bridge, the last bridge on the line. The first thing that went there was firewood, of course. The official opening, however, was on Saturday, the 29th of June, 1907, where John Moffat declared it would be a public holiday. Saturday were being a work day in those days. Public holiday with a grand picnic at Gaines Flat, or also known, or then known as Allbutt, and Betty and Baby, which are the two Krause locomotives that Irvenbank Tramway owned, running numerous trains between the Irvenbank and the picnic grounds. Old John, this loco, the Avonside loco, was not delivered until May 1908, which was almost a year after this photo purports to be the opening. But historical societies, like libraries, quite often get things wrong, and unfortunately, it's quite often difficult to get them corrected. Sure, we all know that. Gaines siding. This is where the opening trains, the official opening trains, the trains to celebrate the official opening of the line ran for their gala picnic. It was a frequent spot for excursions. There were you can see there's a swing here. There were playground. There was things for people to do. There were races and foot races and stuff. And of course, there was the picnic hotel across the line, which was owned by Mr. Gain. Irvenbank itself. This is a remarkable place. When I looked at this map in Rocky Bluff to Denmark, oh, by the way, this is the location of close-up. So here's the dam. The photo we saw of the firewood train passing the dam was around here somewhere. The railway extends all the way down here, crosses Gibbs Creek on this lovely curve, back up the other side, goes into the mining area here, loops around, and here is the station here. You'll note ropeways coming in from New Vulcan mine, or the Vulcan mine, New Vulcan mine it says there, and also from the Governor Norman mine here. Most of Irvenbank's ore came on these ropeways. Smelter here, mill here. Very interesting way from traffic from the mill to get its way up around to get to the smelters for tin, if they railed it to get to the smelters. The blacksmith shop was down here as well, so I suspect it probably wasn't railed. If you think that's sort of, Jerry Verhoeven making things up, this is an Irvenbank company yard drawing showing not just the town area, just the terminal area, with the main line coming in here, crossing over the tracks that went from the hoppers to the mill. Around, that's Loudon House. That was the mine office and the residence of John Moffat. It is now the Irvenbank Museum. Around in a big loop to the station here, which is described as a goods shed, and track ran around in a circle. They didn't bother with a triangle there. They used a balloon loop. So it's real. All these tracks doing all these weird things is real. And here's Hairy Leg's view of it as well. And he's got every track you could possibly think of is into there. This being a later view, you can see that these things, this was the Jessie Street shops. There ain't no shops there anymore. This is McDonald Street, and all that there is there is the pub now. The pub burnt down and was rebuilt. It burnt down recently, I mean, like in historic times, like not in historic times. You know, like the old pub was there when I first visited in 1984. So one highlight of the pub was asking for a glass of red wine to go with my whatever it was I was eating. You didn't get a choice, you just got the meal. And the barmaid said, "Oh, we're out of wine glasses. I'll give you one of these instead," and got out a pot glass or possibly even a schooner glass and then filled it to the very top with red wine. I said, "I think one glass will be enough for me today." Now this photo, I love these old photos, how sharp and clear they are. This photo precedes the tramway. It was taken in 1904 from the hospital. So it was actually taken from up here somewhere, this direction roughly. We're looking down from up here. We've got the smelters to the left over here, and we're in the middle of this photo, and the battery is to the right of them. We zoom in a little bit here. Smelters, this is remarkable photography. Smelters, battery, hoppers for the battery. So the ore came in here by horse, bags or whatever, dumped into there. And then this section of line with its track pushed, hand-propelled ore trucks were pushed from the hopper into the smelter, into the battery, sorry, apologies. Bank was a bit like Stannary Hills. It was surrounded by hills, so there were good views. This is a view showing the smelter. This is a view from, where are we? This direction now. We're looking almost dead straight on at the station here. Very early days, the station is just a goods shed in those days. Here's the smelter. If we're looking down in this direction, the battery is here, but it's sort of hidden. You can't really see it. It also disappears down the hill. The shops in Jessie Street. This shop here, I think, was a grocer, which is interesting to know. We'll have a look at the next photo. Photo taken from a similar location, not a Sharp, sadly, so it's probably taken with more modern equipment. But there is now a passenger waiting area, a passenger station has been added to the end of this separate standalone building. Here's a train departing, having left here, it's winding its way around, it'll go all the way around and then ultimately, eventually will be seen over here on the other side of the dam. This is the grocer I talked about, and there's now a chute of some sort, a ramp to get stuff off the train down into the grocery store. Amazing place. This building is the Queensland National Bank. This building is the Arts or School of Arts. They're still there. Nothing else is, well, not quite true. The battery still is, in some form or another. And Loudon House, which would be over here somewhere, I think. It's a bit hard to see in this photo, is still there. Further around again now, we've now gone all the way around to this side of the station, and we're looking along the line of the Governor Norman roadway. We get the station, the passenger station. There's hoppers here, some sort. And research can be very difficult to do sometimes because you get this photo taken from the same place, or near enough to the same place, which shows the hoppers not there. Those hoppers are present, they're absent. Those hoppers are present there, but they're absent up here. And there's been this building has appeared. I don't actually know which one comes first, to be honest. It could be one of the reasons why people show all lines and stuff like that. I don't really know. Couple more pictures of the station because I like it. It's got a really sharp curve on the exit. There's a firewood train just for fun. And on the roadside, there's lots of horses this era waiting to depart. The station again, passenger trains or trains carrying passengers, they're all mixed, other than the excursion trains. They didn't really matter where they put the passenger car. This one's got sundry good stock, a tiny little four-wheel wagon there. The Irvine Bank passenger car, it's a nice car, and then 4 wagons behind it. This shot has got a Stannary Hills toast rack passenger car. That's the Irvine Bank explosives wagon. There's then sundry other vehicles and another passenger car back there, but it's all just, and people just get on where they want to. And this wonderful sharp photo shows number 3, Old John, lovely tender. Looks pretty new in this photo. This probably was celebrating its delivery. Some 4-wheel wagons, a couple more open flat wagons here. This wagon, and I have no idea what it is. I don't even know how to describe it. Why you would build something like that, I don't know. And the passenger car at the back. A very nice photograph. Oft seen, mind you. Irvine Bank's second loco was Baby, called Baby, and was a baby grouse. It was in fact the last baby grouse to come into Australia. These are, I believe, coal hoppers. They're not the ore hoppers that we have seen in the some of the other photos. They're coal hoppers. Baby spent most of its time shunting around Irvine Bank with occasional forays to get firewood. These are the ore hoppers, and you can see the hand trammed tracks to get ore into the smelter. The main line came in here, or from Irvine Bank Station and around the bend, in here and around and looped out that way. So we're here in this photo. We're actually here looking across the lines from the hopper. Gibbs Creek Bridge here, a nice curved bridge, quite spectacular spot. It was clearly a good spot to take photos from because it featured quite a lot. Here's Betty, the large grouse, their first locomotive, on just looks like an ordinary train. It's got 3 firewood cars and the Irvine Bank passenger carriage. It's got a tender here, which is a bogie open wagon, but with the same 4-wheel tender body that we saw at Chinaman's Creek on it. This is a combined Sunday schools picnic train, taken from the same location, obviously. People everywhere, people happily sitting, standing in the front of the tender, in the middle of the tender. They're all over the place, they are. No one sitting on the roof, though. And there's just a regular train with Old John, its own tender, and an open wagon converted to a passenger car. The little tiny van, I think that's the Stannary Hills explosives van. And that's a toast rack car, and there's other stuff behind it I can't really see. So we've been to all the locations. We'll now cast our attention to what locomotives they had. Stannary Hills had 4, Pompey, the two Falcons, 292 and 293, and Germany, the Borsig. Bank had an 060 Kraus, the big Kraus, Baby, a little baby Kraus, and Old John, a lovely classic British colonial Avonside tank. These locos, the two Falcons, were built in 1901, and I think they must have had problems, possibly water-related, boiler-related, but in 1912, the two of them were combined into a single locomotive. Now, I should say these numbers, with the exception of number 3, the numbers were never carried by the locomotives. They were known by the names, but the names weren't carried on the locomotives either. So the people working on the railways knew what you meant when you said Pompey, Brush, Germany. Well, when there were two of them, they'd give you the builder's number, or Betty Baby or Old John. You didn't need to go hunting around looking at numbers to work out what loco you were rostered on. In 1922, when the government took it over and formed the Urban Bank State Treatment Works and then merged in the Stannary Hills lines, by then Pompey had been withdrawn, so there were just 2 locomotives remaining from Stannary Hills. The combined Brush built from 2 locos and Germany. So they slotted in as numbers 4 and 5, but as I said, the numbers are for, I think, research reference purposes more than anything else. Pompey was a baby Kraus. A number of these came to Australia and worked at places, worked in the Victorian government, and scattered around all over the place eventually. Pompey was cruelly cut down, no cab, chimney chopped in half, in order to allow it to go into Kitchener, to work actually into Kitchener Mine, which would have been a horrendous thing to do. I don't imagine it would have gone in very far, but it still obviously had to fit into the tunnel. That's a shocking photo, but it's the only one I've got showing the loco in this state. Yep, so Pompey was a Kraus Class 4 SS of 30 horsepower. I think originally came in to work Victoria Dock, and then this one was then sold to the South Australian government, and then later, and then came in whatever year it was to Stannary Hills, condemned in 1912. So didn't have such a long, the Stannary Hills line. Did okay. Very similar to the locos that ran at Rubicon, which are drawn up in Peter Evans' book. This is the original version of Peter's book. I didn't rescan these photos to get the coloured versions in his current Rails to Rubicon book. Falcon, built by, 292, 293. This is 292, builder's photo. Built by the Brush Electrical Engineering Company Limited, it says on the builder's plate. Falcon Engine and Car Works, Loughborough, England, number 292, 1901. As I said, I'm not certain when those two companies combined, so I don't know whether the loco was ordered with Brush or ordered with Falcon and completed and delivered when it was Brush. The locos were, you can see it's got this wood burning smokestack. The locos were delivered, fitted out for wood burning. Someone, one of the locals made a comment about the Falcon locos having a very large firebox, which was perfect to burning wood. You could put billets of wood in there. However, after the Urban Bank Tramway opened and traffic got really busy, Stannary Hills Company decided to use coal because they was more efficient. They probably needed the timber for their mine as well, and that therefore meant it was fitted with a more orthodox chimney smokestack. This is a Jim Fanger's drawing of that loco. Not drawn from plans, not drawn from any, not drawn from measuring anything. This one, it was simply redrawn from photographs, photogrammetry. Germany, what we call number 4, built in 1907, and we believe it was in service probably in March 1908. It isn't actually explicitly mentioned in any newspaper report I can find. All I can find is that it was coming in February and was commissioned in June, I think. But we believe that, when I say we, John Browning and I think March was probably the right time. It's a very unusual loco. It's the only 442 Atlantic tender locomotive of any gauge imported into Australia. Other locomotives came in as tanks and might have been converted to tender locos, but it was the only tender loco that was imported into Australia. And it's quite possibly the only 2-foot gauge Atlantic loco anywhere in the world, although John Browning will probably put his hand up and say, no, it's not. We'll find out. It's described in a contemporary article in a German publication as probably the smallest and most delicate Atlantic. It weighed 16 tonnes, generated about 60 horsepower. And I must thank John for supplying that particular article to me and its translation at very short notice. It was a very successful locomotive at Stannary Hills. It was the one that was running right to the end. It was used on the dismantling trains. And no doubt that the short fixed wheelbase here was contributed in that, because it was a very flexible loco to get around the tight curves. Also delivered as a wood-burning locomotive. Also received a more orthodox smokestack and became a coal burner. And was sold after the line closed, was used in dismantling, as I mentioned, and then sold to Cattle Creek Mill, who converted it to a tank, named it Robbie Burns. Don't quite know why. It's nothing to do with anything Robbie Burns, but still, that's what they chose to call it. And it's now at Angram's. Now, this photo was taken a long time ago by me at Angram's. I have no idea what its current state is. I know it's not restored. Jim has a drawing of it. He hadn't digitised this one at the time. I don't think he did, of the locomotive as a tank engine. He did this version as a tender loco. Now, Jim says, well, if you go back here, Jim says, oh, you can't see it. I haven't got it. Jim says it was done through measurements, field measurements. So he's obviously been to Angram's. Well, it's in the same location as he is, and measured it up. Now, he's drawn this with 4'11" wheelbase, but the German article says it's 1,200 millimeters, which is just less than 4 feet. He's also drawn it with these wheels as 18-inch. The carrying wheels on the loco is 18-inch, and the bogie wheels on the tender 15. Although the article said, though, everything was 18, and in fact that was one of the features of this locomotive, was that you only needed to keep 2 tyre sizes, one for the driving wheels and one for all the other wheels. So quite who to believe there. I mean, it's not impossible that magazines, publications don't quite get all the figures right either. Moving on to the Irvine Tramway, Betty, they're a large Krause. Here seen again with a regular sized smoke box. And again at Chiamans Creek, we've seen those photos before. Here it is later with a much extended smoke box. I have not seen a single photo of Betty which doesn't have this enormous smokestack on it. This loco went to the Innisfail Tramway in 1922. Don't know how long it lasted there. I can't recall. Similar class of loco to Moreton, which is ran at the Central Mill, Moreton. Can't remember, Namble. There's Jim's diagram of that loco. And finally, we get to the baby grouse. This was loco number 55, builders number 5530. It is the last of these locomotives, this small Krauss locomotives to come into Australia. It's a class 4, so it's the same class, basic class as the Stannary Hills version, BL. So they've wrapped around the letters a bit further, still 30 horsepower. Similar in appearance to these Krausses that operated at Mount Lyell. I don't have a drawing. There probably are drawings, I just don't have one. And it seemed to spend all of its life with this tender, a 4-wheel truck with one of the cube water tanks. Finally, Old John, Avonside 1539. A builder's photo here. Says this is the only one with the number. It says number 3 quite clearly, as it does there. It didn't take long on the builder's photo show this back lower cab sheet to be sort of complete all the way across, but by now they've removed it to get access to a tender. This was only ever had this coal burning stack. Lovely classic locomotive. Don't know the significance of the star on the smokestack. Seen here leaving Irvine in one photo and the one we've seen before at Yorkeys. This was sold to Marion Mill in 1938, converted to 2-foot gauge, and then scrapped in 1969, which was very disappointing, I'm sure. And this is a part of the general arrangement drawing that I got from Armley Mills, which is where the Avonside archives are. There's a lot more to it than just this bit. Onto the rolling stock, and we're in the home stretch now. Stannary Hills passenger cars. We talked about the 4-wheel car. Classic little car, it's very, very narrow, apparently built on an all-wagon underframe. And I like the tender as well, which seemed to live with Pompey for much of its life. Stannary Hills Workshops built these open toast rack cars, 2 of them. I do not know whether these are 2 different ones or whether one morphed into that. I don't know, but they were 2. After the Irvine line opened, the preferred car to use was the fully enclosed Irvine car, understandably. But these were often enough used on the same train as that car, as the Irvine car. There were also a couple of rail cars. The one on the left was the mine manager's rail car and was inspection purposes and to get to places. This one on the right, a caption to the photo, I think I got this from SLV actually, State Library Victoria. Family in rail motor going to the mill for a picnic. There are other photos that show this type of rail car, but you can see here there's 1, 2, 3, 4 perhaps kids, a mum and a photographer all crammed on here to go to the mill probably on a Sunday for a picnic. Whether it's the same family that we saw photographed on the ore car, I don't know. The Irvine passenger car, much classier passenger car, this one. Remarkably similar in appearance to the Northeast Dundas car to my eyes. Now that might simply be because I'm counting 8 windows in 4 pairs and it's got end platforms, but The dimensions are pretty well the same. One of the only differences is that this car, I think it had just longitudinal seating along the length of the car, but I don't know. I haven't really seen an indoor photo. However, what we can see as we see another photo and then this drawing, which was drawn by Jim, but from drawings by Mike Loveday, shows the door in the centre of the end, whereas the Northeast Dundas cars, the doors are offset, and the seats are like 2-in-1 type seating, transverse seating. But a much classier passenger car than anything else. Ore hoppers, Stannary Hills had lots of these. They carried about 2.5 tonnes. These are the guys at the Eclipse mine near Stannary Hills. This is the photo taken at the junction. There were lots and lots of these left beside the tram line, which means that photographing them, measuring them is not difficult, providing you can get to them. Some of them are a walk, of course. I have said I don't believe these scoops were able to be removed. You would have thought that a wagon standing on its side like that, this would have probably come off. They are bolted down here. You can see this doesn't pivot like a normal tipper would. Bloke at Irvine Bank, Free Thinkers Cottage, I think it is, has enough metal work to construct one of these cars. He's just got to get around to, cutting the timber and bolting it all together. And this was proved very, very useful. And here's a skip, although this one's lost its bottom, because the combination of this underframe and remnants and metal and this actual scoop allowed Peter Lukey, the late Peter Lukey, he sadly passed away suddenly, unexpectedly, to come up with this drawing, which was very useful for me. In fact, I had had a bit of input into it as well. Very useful for me when I was planning to build 20 of them. Stannary also had some interesting goods vehicles. These ones, all of these 3 vehicles here are bogie vehicles, but the bogies look like just all truck underframes. And you can see how high the base of the vehicle is off the top. Really quite bizarre. Now this photo is a photo taken by Dr. Bancroft, and he says in his writing that this might be charcoal going presumably to the smelters at Irvine Bank as flux. Did they use charcoal as flux, or did they use charcoal to burn the smelters, probably for the heat? Stannary Hills weren't daunted by difficult things to do. This is an 85-foot long pole, a head frame for a mine. A whole lot of vehicles in the middle of it. It would be very interesting to seeing that wandering around 1.5 chain curves. Note this 4-wheel wagon with this ball type handbrake. This is an upside down underframe, which is at Angram's at Woods again, which allowed Peter Lukey to then draw this as a version of it. I think he's got the wheels a bit close together, but I can't argue with him anymore. And we've seen this photo before. This is odd. This is a bogie wagon. There's a whole lot of unknown questions about good stock. Not something that too many people document in newspapers. Bogie wagon and this little half-length. I wonder whether it was used for passengers. I don't know. And a couple of 4-wheel trucks at the back with kegs. Irvine Bank had hoppers too. These were used for coal, we believe, according to Peter Lukey. This is on display at Freethinker Cottage. Urban Bank had a very, very well-equipped workshop, using here that they're in the process of building a 4-wheel open wagon. We know the dimensions of this wagon because we have correspondence from John Moffat, a telegram, I think, from John Moffat to another railway somewhere in Australia, telling him what the dimensions of these wagons were so that this other company could build the same things. This one again, I don't know what it is. It's Urban Bank Tramway. Don't know. Open wagon looks very similar, even to the stakes at the end. They're very similar to Northeast Dundas again. Which is interesting, isn't it? I think the passenger car is very similar to Northeast Dundas, and these are very similar to Northeast Dundas. It's not impossible that they got information. Here is the firewood cars, and here is one of these bogie open wagons, roofed as a passenger car. It's got bags of stuff in there. But you can see these little black marks. That one's fallen off there, but these little black marks there, and up there, they were brackets that were used to attach seats onto the inside of the car so people could sit down, and they could be used as emergency passenger vehicle or picnic trains, excursion trains. This is the Urban Bank's official drawing of an explosives wagon, not very well photographed. Whoever took it wasn't me. Peter drew it a square version. Explosives wagon, odd shape, this curved roof, very distinctive, and regularly attached next to passenger cars or next to the loco. Something that I find a bit weird. So that's all the history. What's happened recently? In 1984 was my first visit to Urban Bank. I didn't know anything at all about it. I'd read the articles, but they were a long time ago that I'd read them. And in fact, I think I'd forgotten all about it. And my wife and I were just driving past and I saw the sign that said Urban Bank. And I thought, oh, this is an old mining town in there. We'll go. This is the battery, from a slightly different angle. The hoppers here. This place, I don't think we could get in. People were scavenging and people were working the smelter area almost as an open cut to try and get stuff out of the slag. They really destroyed what could have been wonderful heritage. This is Loudon House. So this is the old Urban Bank mine office and home of John Moffat, and it is now the Loudon House Museum. Definitely, if you're ever up this way, definitely worth a visit. It is full of all sorts of incredible stuff. A lot of photos, a lot of things to see, a lot more stuff that interests a lot more people than, I go in there mainly looking for tramway stuff, but there's a hell of a lot more. This is the station. You can see at some stage it was being used for something else, and it had these nice glass doors across the front. Here's the passenger waiting room, really, and that's the goods shed. There were some funny goings on up at Urban Bank. And this area is all fenced off at this time. I don't know whether it still is, but all sorts of shenanigans were going on, and things were then being fenced off and trying to sort stuff out. People were, going in and pinching things. People who were meant to be looking after them were pinching things. So that's pretty much externally as it was. Obviously, the clear story would have had windows all the way down. This is an Urban Bank tramway formation close to the town dam. Further on, it goes through here at what I think it was 4 Mile siding. Cummings Creek across the bridge where we saw Betty, and very clearly visible there. Yorkie's cutting. The cutting is slumped into to fill it up, but still interesting to see and look at, walk through. Ivanhoe. It took me 3 goes to get to Ivanhoe. Even in a rental car, I couldn't dare cross the creek and drive to get to Ivanhoe. I have to get to the station site even. But fortunately, Peter took me there in a 4-wheel drive. Unfortunately, the night before, I'd slept on a very bad bed and I'd woken up with an absolutely incredibly painful back, something I'm prone to every now and then. So I was very limited in what I could do when I got here, which was very disappointing. But this is a remnant of Ivanhoe. There was quite a lot of mining stuff around, and there were bins and stuff, hopper bodies, hopper scoops scattered all over the place. Very interesting. Oh, and that overhead over track ore hopper at Ivanhoe burnt down. The line was still in use, but only really from Irvine. It wasn't being used for any Stannary Hills ore at the time, and the loco went underneath it to go to Boom Mill. When he came back, it was burnt. And that's it. So some further reading, if you're interested. ARHS Bulletin has some information on it. Light Railways has better information on it. Issue 30 and 32, which were really put together into this book. Rocky Bluff to Denmark, and the magazines and Rocky Bluff to Denmark are available as free downloads on our website. So you can download the Rocky Bluff part, the Stannary Hills Tramway Urban Bank Rocky Bluff part of that book separately from our website. And Ruth Kerr is working on, well, I said John Kerr's manuscript. It probably should be on their manuscript for a new book on the tramways. John Kerr has sadly passed away, and we were very concerned that the manuscript might just be forgotten, but Ruth is actively working on it at the moment. So we're looking forward to yet another new book we can publish. General publications, Two White Swans is some of these are probably impossible to get, but Two White Swans is a pictorial book of photos taken around Urban Bank and Stannary Hills. 3 books by Ruth on John Moffat. John Moffat's Empire, God Bless John Moffat, and John Moffat of Urban Bank. And these following 2 books by Glenville Pike have small sections covering the tramway. There's a couple of fiction books. Idris Backer-Cans and the Tin Scratchers is interesting. And this is a juvenile fiction book, Stannary Hills by C.R. Cummings, Chris, I think, Cummings. Juvenile fiction, but it's interesting in the way it describes the mines around Stannary Hills. And that is it. All done. Now I have a whole bunch of 28 chats. For me to read the chats, I think I have to stop sharing. I shall do that. And now I can see them over here. Yes, and in fact, the first one is that Ruth Kerr would like it be known that she and her husband wrote a 3,000-word history of these tramways.
30,000.
Did I say 3?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Ruth. 30,000-word history. So she's working hard on that at the moment.
I'm about a third of the way through, but need to expand a bit.
Yep, cool. Very good.
Hmm.
Okay. Roderick asked when the government took over, and Ruth answered. Roderick says, I've worked with hairy legs and think he's wrong in other places. In what sort of seam does this ore exist? Good question. Don't know. Gavin says a sizable auxiliary tender. Yes, well, and John's answered that. Oh, he's a good man. The long tender. All these questions have been answered without me. Isn't that splendid? The long tender of the British of the Brush loco was built in 1907. Falcon Locomotive Company was formed in 1889. Later became Brush. Correction, was acquired by Brush in 1889. Okay, so it would mean it was ordered from Brush, right?
Mm.
Yep. More stuff from John about the, is this mining contemporary with Tasmania, or did one overtake the other? Don't know. John Browning's answered that one. I think next time I do this presentation, I'll invite John along to stand beside me to answer all the questions.
Yeah, well,
Well,
John, thank
hang
you.
on, there's still more to come here, Bill. I'm
Is
just
there?
reading through
Oh,
all of
right.
these
Oh,
chats.
right.
Yeah,
Hang on,
all
I'll
the
go
firewood movements.
I'll have a lay down.
Yeah, I presume coal would have been long haul and expensive, so machinery, yeah, local source firewood, absolutely right. Boilers to drive the mines, to drive the batteries, and the locos. Yeah. Is the complex layout the result of grades and slopes? Yes. And also working around pre-existing buildings? Yes. They were mules, not horses. Yeah, well, I said mules or horses in the notes that I'd written, but I think I only said mules. And the gable-ended wagon could be an explosives wagon. I don't know, because they had that curved roof one. What was the economic importance of tin?
That gable end wagon, it was interesting in the shape of it, and the doors on the side, which were like a pair of doors that opened up. Might it have been a meat wagon?
Don't know. That wagon also, I didn't mention it when I showed the photo of it, had an end platform at one end.
Oh, right. Okay.
A bit weird too. Now, whether there was a further entry at that end platform, I don't know, because I've never seen a photo from the end.
Yeah.
John Browning about the Borsig is specially designed to meet the specifications. Population. There could well be livestock transport, house cows, pigs. I'd vote explosive transport for the odd-shaped vehicle. Well, they had an explosive vehicle that is photographed on many trains, which was with the curved roof.
But might it not have been for carrying goods and groceries to the site?
Well, that's possible. That's possible.
Mm.
They didn't seem to have any orthodox covered vans that, you would, in American term, boxcars. They didn't seem to have any of those. So it's possible that was what they had. It's really weird though. There's this, the doors coming out almost like dormers, from an attic roof. Very strange.
Yeah, well.
Unfortunately, we lost a lot of information from Irvine Bank because of a fire. And there was also, I'm being told by someone who I know well, that who's much older than me, possibly 90 by now, that Irvine Bank had nitrate film of the operation of the mine and the tramway and everything. Nitrate is very dangerous, and when someone found that it was nitrate, they dumped it before it caught fire. I think, isn't that what nitrate films tend to do? They tend to catch fire.
Yeah.
So, which was very disappointing. And Roderick finally asked, how safe is hiking there for attacks by poisonous insects and reptiles? Well, I didn't find any problems. It depends possibly what time of year.
Mm.
What?
It's obviously good territory to explore.
Oh yeah, absolutely, Rod. And Ruth has written the a heritage report of the tramways. There's a whole lot of information in there about sort of what's around now. Is available too.
Yeah.
Any more questions, anybody?
Oh, just a comment in that John and I walked the whole of the Irvine Bank Tramway, the whole of Rocky Bluffs, plus Arboyne, and all the way along the Stannary Hills Tramway down past the crossing of the Port Douglas to Georgetown telegraph line, which is out on the flat.
Yep.
We did that back in the late 80s,
Oh,
about
okay.
1985, 86. And I've walked the first kilometre or so out from Bun Moo.
Yeah.
So I have a pretty good idea of what's there.
Yep. Yeah. Very
I
good.
also wrote a detailed article about Rocky Bluffs for the Australasian Mining History Association journal in, I think it was 2004.
Can you hear me? Scott Clinton here.
Yes, Scott.
What you've shown us, to my mind, means that a hell of a lot of capital was spent here.
Yes.
How productive were the mines? Did they pay for themselves, or
No.
was it a washout?
I can't comment about Irvine Bank because my research, I've been reading stuff about Stannary Hills, and like most or an awful lot of mining enterprises, they talk a good story to get the money in, prospectuses and the like, but they were not. They were busy for a while, but the ore wasn't as rich as they expected. It never is, and it ran out sooner than they expected, and they dug deeper down but couldn't find anything, and said, oh, but we know it's over there, so we'll go over there. Give us a bit more money, we'll go over there. But no.
The productive business was really history than anything else.
Well, yeah.
It's Ruth here.
Yep.
I can comment on that to a certain extent, in that what John just said is quite correct about Stannary Hills. The purpose of the Irvine Bank Tramway, constructed by John Moffat's Irvine Bank Mining Company, was quite different. The Irvine Bank Tramway was built for transport from Irvine Bank to Stannary to Bun Moo to Cairns, etc. A purely transport tramway. John Moffat ran a private company, never public, and he put in an enormous amount of capital. He raised an enormous amount of capital through public companies and vendor shares, etc. And it was the Mount Albion Silver Mining Company, 6 miles west of Irvine Bank, in 1886-7, when Moffat had a smelter there and sold his vendor shares. Moffat became a millionaire at the time, 1888.
A millionaire in 1888. Wow.
1888.
Yeah, wow.
And that was a boom time economically in Australia and the world. And so he and his company was always able to invest to promote mines into public companies sell the shares, his shares, and then the ore would be carted in by horses and mules, etc., to the Irvine smelters, which Moffat's Irvine Mining Company, private company, owned and operated. And he made, that was a custom mill, as in it crushed and smelted the company's own ore, but also took ore from all the small miners and small companies all around. I hope that helps understand. Moffat made a profit until about 1912, and the real issue he faced from the 1880s was that the government never built a railway to Herberton until 1910, even though the people clamoured for it since 1880. And Moffat was west of Herberton. He owned mines at Watsonville and then, of course, Irvinebank. He was very good in the early 1880s on getting overseas technology to build the smelters, etc. But as the years went on and there was still no government railway to his enterprise, he felt he had to build his own railway, and as Stannary Hills had already built one, albeit a 2-foot gauge, narrow gauge tramway, small, a tramway, Moffat built a line to connect to it and used it for transport purposes. The Vulcan mine, not the new Vulcan, the Vulcan in 1907. And there was an aerial tramway, an aerial ropeway. It was extremely profitable. Publicly, it looked as though local people owned it, but Moffat had a huge number of shares through trustees, and I have traced that in the National Bank archives through his bank accounts. The Vulcan was extremely profitable. It was the deepest tin mine in Australia, I am told. The Waratah mine in Tasmania was the most profitable tin mine in Australia. And Moffat also had the Governor Norman mine to the east of Irvinebank, which was also very good grade and profitable. I hope that helps all of you understand some more, but feel free to ask me questions.
Thanks,
as
Ruth.
well as John.
Yeah, I'd like to ask, thank you, John, and now Ruth, you're sharing this quite detailed information. I've never have known anything, and I'm been following narrow gauge railway, so this is very enlightening. All this, it just goes to show how much narrow gauge stuff in Australia is still to be sort of researched and uncovered. But I'd like to ask, how did they? Because you mentioned how deep these mines are, how did they first survey and discover these deposits?
Well, I might briefly respond. Through surface outcrops. These mines were discovered and opened before geology or geological exploration as we know it and drilling was introduced, and they followed prospectors. And remember that mines, even today, but mines are always discovered by, in those days, single prospectors. In more recently, by very small companies, exploration companies. And so it was prospectors finding surface deposits and following them. And that, of course, caused an enormous difficulty ultimately for the mining industry. And Dixon, who established the Stannary Hills Company, remarked on this, in that the miners round Herberton, and happens pretty well everywhere, picked the eyes out of the surface deposits and the area and the depth that they could afford to dig down to. And Dixon remarked that Herberton, particularly, and Watsonville, had been horribly decimated or destroyed to a fair extent because of this picking out of the rich ores. And he complained about this to the government, and he refused to invest in Stannary Hills mines until the government changed the Mining Act to permit companies to make much bigger investments. And you see, the difference that was occurring on these fields was that there were all these small miners, individuals, mining small mines. John Moffat's company, a private company, did things on a much bigger scale because he had capital from Sydney as well as his own. And it wasn't until the passage of the Mining Act 1898 that companies such as Dixon's Stannary Hills Company could invest on a larger scale. And he tried, but I've analysed it in my book based on my PhD thesis that Moffat's company had already mined out some of those mines at Stannary Hills, so that by the time the Stannary Hills Company started mining, they had a difficult task of doing much more exploration. Hope that helps.
And the reference to right at the start of this presentation where I talked about we're going tin scratching. Tin scratching is, one-man prospectors just scrabbling around looking for tin near the surface.
Yeah. But it's typical of so many areas where the people who actually discover these ore bodies really ended up with nothing.
Depends how.
Like in Tasmania.
Depends how. Yeah, true. I think mining's a pretty mining, unless you do it at a large, humongous scale, is very difficult now. Well, was very difficult then to do continuously, successfully, because you just ran out of ore.
Yeah.
I worked in the mines department for quite a few years, and I learnt from geologists, and what I already knew to a fair extent, is that mining is extremely speculative.
Yeah.
Mining is gambling, really. and exploration companies have worked very hard. The Queensland legislation was changed 1968, implemented in 1972 to allow major exploration programs to discover new mines, particularly in the Mount Isa province and elsewhere. But the point is, as you said, mining is extremely speculative and it's really gambling.
Yep.
Still is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Except for coal, as in the Bowen Basin, which the Queensland government did a very big program of drilling, government funded to drill to explore the extent of the coal fields.
Yeah. Yeah, I think about Kalgoorlie Boulder and the super pit that's there these days. And all the smaller mines got bought up by Alan Bond, and they were able to get a reasonable profit out of the enterprise then. Any other questions?
Well,
You're talking, Nigel, because you're not saying anything.
Push your space bar, Nigel, if you're asking a question.
I just want to ask John, I was interested when you were describing Irvanbank, how the line came in with that big horseshoe bend bridge, obviously to gain elevation into the town. Do you happen to know the height that they gained from the point where it came around the corner to the height of where the smelters were? And do you happen to know that information?
No, I do not. No, there might be somewhere written, but I do not have it. I mean, not up here anyway. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's certainly up. I mean, that's the whole purpose of it, was to gain altitude. And when you're at Loudon House, you look down over what's left of the town. You walk downhill. I mean, it's not, we're not talking about hundreds and hundreds of feet, but the trains, I don't know what the gradient was, but yeah, working their way to get the grade. And as I think Ruth said, also to go around, I mean, the battery, the smelters, they were already there. So they had to sort of fit in amongst all of those as well.
Yeah. Any other questions?
I'd just like to say that I look forward to working with you, John, Dennis,
Thanks, Ruth.
in progressing the manuscript to finalisation, and to John Browning about the locomotives. He and I have talked a bit about that before, so that we can finalise this and honour what my John started and we wrote together. Should have been done before this, but we're doing it now.
You've got to fit it into everything else you have to do in life, Ruth. But thank you. I do look forward to you progressing it and me helping you in whatever way I can.
Thanks.
Sounds like it'll be an interesting collaboration.
Yes.
Now, John, question for you. Why haven't you built that railway?
There were two big reasons, Bill. The first one was, I think I dismantled what I had, stored it, and then thought, oh, now I have to build locomotives. I have to build rolling stock. I have to build, 20 or however many of those little four-wheel hoppers that I need. And starting from scratch, I think that was overwhelming all of a sudden. Whereas before I started to do it, I thought, yeah, I can do this, but it was overwhelming. But I built Irvine Bank or Ivanhoe, a representation of, and then saw that I'd put that siding entry in the wrong way. And because that was on such tight curves, Ivanhoe is on a curve anyway, so I built the model on a curve. And I'd put all the scenery down. There just wasn't anywhere I could change to reverse that siding. I would have had to have basically ripped it all down to the track level again and almost start again.
Yeah.
So, I decided, well, I didn't decide. It wasn't really a decision taken at the time. It was simply over time I thought, this is too hard.
And your train room filled up with junk.
And now the train room is filled up with junk and infested with spiders. Well, it had spiders anyway, even when we were running trains in there every week or two. Yeah. But it's now infested with junk, horribly. Yeah.
So just as a matter of interest, there's Rocky Bluff to Denmark, which had that Stannary Hills.
This one.
Well, look at that.
Yeah.
Snap.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just flicked through the article. It is purely about the tramway. And yeah, it doesn't really give the full reason as to why it all happened.
No.
So what you and Ruth are going to work on, we look forward to it.
Thanks.
Question, even at this time of night, I don't know what sort of climate does that area have. We're used to the timber in Victoria being denuded for mining. What sort of timber did that area sustain to be useful for both pit props and burning?
And sleepers too.
Yeah.
There was quite a lot of cypress pine out near Orient Camp and Weenet, and there was a siding off the Irvine Bank tramway at Orient Camp to harvest the cypress pine for sleepers. Otherwise, it's eucalypt, bloodwood, etc. It's open savanna country.
Yeah. So you're down, you're below you've gone up to the tablelands and you're now in the savanna on the other side of the tablelands, like that country that your 1100 class is in, 1150, 1170 class is in. Yeah, so that's that country, Rod.
Yeah,
same type of country.
Lapper. That's right. That's why I picked that photo. That's Lapper.
Yeah.
Which was
I went through
other mining branch to Mount Mulligan.
Yeah, Mount Mulligan. Yeah.
Which John Moffat funded a fair bit of. That was, and then the state took it over.
He had a finger in an awful lot of pies, John Moffat.
You can see that's very spindly timber, which is why I thought, how good is it for the purposes that mining needs?
You're going to burn a lot of it to boil water from the boiler.
Well, Italian immigrants became charcoal burners, as they were called, in the Mont Albion and Irvine Bank area, producing charcoal for the smelters, etc. And there are photos of the charcoal heaps like pyramids. One of them was published in the Mines Department annual report.
Very good. All right, if that's it, it's well after 10 o'clock now, Australian Eastern Standard Time, now that we're off daylight saving. If there's no other serious questions at the moment, I think we might call it a night.
John, I just want to thank you. New information, really, really enjoyable. Thanks, Ruth, for your input. Yeah, I read what it was about, and my husband went, "Oh, that sounds good," but I didn't. I'm so glad I listened. I don't know what it was about, but it was very, very well, very, very, very well presented. Thank you. Very well, and thank you so much, Ruth. It was like, it's just like a new something we didn't know, and now presented in a way that's exciting, and you can look through it. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks.
But what a magnificent selection of photos.
Isn't it good?
Oh, fantastic! So many that I've never seen before. Yeah,
Nigel, your comment about you'd never heard of this railway was exactly why I started to write the column for Narrow Gauge Down Under. The whole object of it was to highlight railways which were not puffing billy, not sugarcane. They were things that people didn't know about. So I covered mining, construction, building dams. Well, it's construction, I guess. Forestry, of course, logging. All stuff that lots of people would not have even ever heard of.
Yeah.
But after about 50 or 60 of them, I gave up. I ran out of energy. What I ran out of was good photos, but I also ran out of energy. It was getting to be a real drag every 3 months to have another article ready.
Yeah. Good effort. All right.
Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Yeah, I'm sure
Thank
everybody's
you.
appreciated
Thanks.
it. Yeah, Mike, have you got anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'm good, Bill. Just the only one thing that for those people left who aren't members of the society, once again, I'd like to encourage you to join. It doesn't cost much to become a PDF member, but it helps us. So those of you who aren't a member, we'd love to have you in our ranks and get your support. So that's it, Bill. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and with the number of questions, obviously, a lot of you have. And without further ado, we'll hopefully see you all in 2 months' time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Not all. Great evening.
Yeah.
Good.
Night all.
Thanks.
Good night.
Lovely to
Bye.
see John and Ruth again. Bye.
Yes.
Yeah, right.